We are starting off our discussion with the Canadian perspective on the pipeline. I'm joined by David Biette, Director of the Canada Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center here in Washington, D.C. David, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Before we get to the pipeline and all that oil being sent from Canada to the Gulf Coast, there is evidence to tell us that the oil sands method of extraction is extremely bad for the environment. The State Department here says that oil sands pumps about 17% more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere than standard oil drilling. Is that of concern to the Canadian government, or are they just interested in making money?
No, I think, well, first of all, let me say that the resource in Canada belongs to the province. So it's Alberta's issue and not the Canadian government's, although the Canadian government does look at environmental issues. But yes, there are more emissions from mining oil sands. Depends on how you do it. But it also depends on how you measure it. It can be more if you just look at the extraction. If you look at from wells to wheels, as they talk, it comes closer to traditional oil. So yes, it's more, but we have a market for it in the United States. It's not like they're producing it and forcing it on us. We're buying it because we want to drive everywhere. But
this oil that's going to be pumped to the Gulf Coast is not going to be sold in the United States. It's just going to go into the open market.
Not necessarily. Right now, the United States can't export oil. We can export it to Canada, but we really can't export to other places. We can export condensates and some others. We export finished product like gasoline or diesel to Europe, but we can't export raw oil. So that's something that Congress has to deal with. But so if we can't export it, it's going to be used domestically in our domestic market, where we already have 25% of the oil we use comes from Canada.
Now, if we look at the route this oil pipeline is going to take, all the way from Canada to the Gulf Coast, wouldn't it be a lot shorter route to just pump it out through the west coast of Canada?
There's no infrastructure there, and there is already a lot of infrastructure in the United States that connects with Alberta fields. We've had a lot of gas coming from Alberta and conventional oil coming from Alberta. We also have oil sands, oil coming to Chicago and other places in the United States already. We already have a lot of pipelines, and this is another to help ease the bottleneck.
Right, because the question being asked, as we heard in that report there, is why should the United States take all this risk of, a possible accident, damage to the environment, etc.? Shouldn't Canada take that risk and build its own pipeline?
Canada's market's here. So if you want to receive the product, you have to have the infrastructure to receive it, and the United States is the principal market for that. Yes, you asked about shipping it to the West Coast. There are problems there. You'd have to build a complete new pipeline there. But we already have the system here. We just need to expand it more. And this is a new pipeline spec'd to, right now, 2015 standards. It's not a pipeline that was put in underground 40, 50 years ago.
Right. Where does Canadian public opinion stand on this?
Canadian public opinion is changing. There was some majority support for the Keystone XL pipeline, and in the last year and a half, it's gone down considerably, about from 68% to about under 50%. But it's curious because the Keystone XL pipeline is built to the border in the United States, but it's an American decision to build the rest of it from the Canadian border to the Gulf Coast, or actually the Canadian border to Steel City, because Steel City I believe, or Cushing, Oklahoma to the Gulf Coast is already built. So it's that one segment that we have a problem with.
Right. Now, there have been changing circumstances, and one of them is the fact that the oil price is dropping. Something to like $50 a barrel right now. It costs more to produce a barrel of oil sands oil, doesn't it?
It does. But the capital has already been invested in the fields now, so they can pull it out at that price. It's new investment that's having the problem. It is having a problem in Calgary as well. I mean, Calgary is seeing that in the province of Alberta, it's not what it used to be. It's not what it was a couple of years ago.
There was a proposed North American Leaders Summit that was going to take place. Canada has postponed that. Does that indicate to us that there's some kind of friction here, that the Canadians are not too happy with the fact that President Obama has not yet taken a decision on this? That's
probably an understatement. The Canadians are not very happy with the president. They think that he's dawdling. I think the postponement also has to do with Canada-Mexico relations, but we won't get into that right now.
What about First Nations groups in Canada? They've expressed concern. These are, of course, Indigenous people who feel that their environment is going to be damaged. This is their ancestral lands, their homeland. That's where they live.
Right. That's a particular problem heading to the West Coast. That you have First Nations. Some have land claims that have been settled with the Crown. Others don't have land claims settled. It's rather a big mess. Some are concerned about having the pipeline go through, and others are welcoming it. We tend to hear more of those who are against it, but there are some for it. There are jobs involved, there's there's risk involved in everything, and it depends on how people receive risk and are willing to deal with the risk.
You know, there's a great deal of political debate here in the United States about this pipeline right now. It's pitted left against right, environmentalists against people who feel that this is good for economic growth, etc. What are your own feelings on this pipeline? Do you think ultimately it will be built?
I think opposition to the pipeline has become a movement to get off oil. And it's not really about the pipeline now, it's about getting off oil. I think we'll probably see it built because the United States has an economic need for the oil. As long as there's demand, we'll try to find the supply. But if you cut off the supply, the demand will go else. We'll try to find the demand from somewhere else, or we'll pay more. But I do think eventually it will probably go through. Look, it's a brand new modern pipeline with very well spec'd. We don't want it to leak. You're not going to invest $4 billion in something that you know is going to leak and cause an environmental mess. You want to make darn sure that it's going to work.
David Biette, thanks for joining us. Thanks for your views.
You're very welcome.